My name is Steve Greenfield from Automotive Ventures, and I've got about 18 minutes with you to talk about the state of the auto industry. So I've got too much content to go over, but I'm going to glance across the top of a bunch of content that hopefully is relevant for you and that you enjoy today. If you're interested, happy to get you a copy of the presentation. And if you've got questions afterwards, I will be around to answer questions. So let's dive right in here. I've got 6 different areas that I'd like to cover today very, very quickly in the next 20 minutes. First, talking about where we are in terms of dealership profitability. We're actually going to dovetail today's presentation, starting off with profitability and ending with why the dealer model, I believe, is durable and defensible into the future. Number 2, everyone's favorite topic du jour is electric vehicles. Number 3, no conversation about the auto industry, both domestically and globally, we can be complete without at least addressing the fact that we've just gone through a fairly transformational election here in the US, which will transition quite nicely into a conversation about China. And then we'll talk about vehicles aftermarket from both a repair standpoint and a maintenance and service standpoint, and some of the implications on dealers overall. So let's get started. I'm sorry that I do pace around a little bit, so I'll try to be cognizant of that if you're looking at the slides. Let's talk about dealership profitability. So the outside world sees headlines like this. Dealership profitability year over year is down pretty significantly. So for someone who's outside the industry, like, oh, this industry is under attack, under duress. But what they don't realize, and thanks to Aaron Kerrigan Advisors for this data, is that if we look at profitability, net profit before tax by dealership rooftop, a number that all of you pay particular attention to, we were sitting at about $2 million profit before tax per dealership rooftop before COVID. And that had been pretty consistent for the last few years before this. What did COVID do? Dealers in 2022, on average, that number tripled. We got up to $6.8 million profit before tax per dealership rooftop. So yes, while dealership profitability is getting down to some more normalized level, it's still twice as profitable. The average rooftop in America is still twice as profitable as it was pre-COVID. Why is this? This represents 2 different data points. First, gross profit per unit sold for new vehicles per dealer in America. In the blue line. So we see that pre-COVID, dealers were making on average $2,000 profit per new car sold. And that number tripled in 2022, no coincidence, when we see a tripling of overall profitability to 6,000. So this is drifting back down, but you see the numbers that we experienced last year are still significantly higher than they were pre-COVID. Well, why did this dynamic happen? I don't have to tell dealers in the audience. We went from 4 million vehicles on dealers' lots in America, new vehicles on dealers' lots in America before COVID, which was hitting record highs, to 800,000 cars, less than 800,000 cars on dealers' lots during COVID. The dynamic was, and these are directional numbers, something like 90% of vehicles, new vehicles sold pre-COVID, were being sold at a discount to MSRP. Only 10% of vehicles in 2022 were being sold at a discount to MSRP. And this is coming back to haunt us in some ways. We had a consumer who 2-3 years ago that bought a car at sometimes $15,000 premium to MSRP, and they're coming back in trying to trade that vehicle now that we've gone back to regular depreciation schedules. These consumers sometimes are underwater by $5,000-$10,000, and dealers, in an environment where interest rates are higher, dealers in many cases are having a hard time rolling that negative equity into the new vehicle purchase. I'll thank Glenn Mercer for this slide, and it is a bit of an eye chart, but there's one metric in particular I'll draw your attention to. This is perhaps my most important slide, and again, thanks to Glenn Mercer. So what this shows is dealership profitability. We just talked about a dealership's net profit before tax. What this represents is going back 50 years in history. 50 years in history. This blue line on this axis shows a dealer's net profit before tax on average in America. And you'll see something, if you squint and turn your head sideways, you'll see something eerie about this number. There's never been a year in 50 years that the average dealer in America didn't have a positive profit before tax. And if you look at this number is eerily consistently hovering at around 2%. It might get up to 3%. It might go down to 1%. It never goes negative. Now, if we rolled back the clock 50 years, any dealers here selling new cars 50 years ago? I don't imagine there's too many. Um, there's innovation in the business model that I'll get to in a minute. Tremendous innovation in the business model that has made the business model much more defensible and durable. But this shocks me. Now, if I added in the COVID years, you would see this jump to 7.5%. We'd be up here. So for any dealers in the audience that believe we're not going to regress back towards the mean, meaning not get back to something like 2% net profit margins before tax, you're probably either smoking something or you're delusional, and that's okay. You can be delusional, but fight it as long as you can. But history would tell us that it's more likely than not, you're going to get back to about 2% net profit before tax. So if I have one takeaway, I might not be popular after discussing this, but if we use history as a guide, it's likely. It's likely. So let me actually fast forward through some slides here. I'll get you these slides. I have a lot of content here, but I actually want to dwell on that a little bit. So I'm going to move forward here, get over here and move through slides. So this will be tantalizing and tempting perhaps for some of the content that I would have showed you otherwise. But let me get to a couple of things that I think are important and may or may not. Jay and I haven't rehearsed this, but this may dovetail into some of the conversations he's going to have on stage. So 4 years ago, if I was up here on stage, I probably would have said, man, we're going to see an onrush of EV sales. And these EVs are far less complex than ICE vehicles. The average ICE vehicle has 2,000 moving parts in the drivetrain, and the average EV has 20. So I would be telling dealers up here, I'd be like, look out, as you sell more EVs, you're going to see those consumers much less frequently. Much less free. The service intervals just aren't there for oil changes, spark plugs, belts, hoses, etc. What we've seen actually is the legacy automakers have been pretty bad at building quality EVs in the first generation. So what's meant is you've been busier than ever with recalls. There've been a lot of recalls for these vehicles, which has been great. I mean, you may hate recalls, but it's kept the service base busy for EVs overall. But much of the concern 4 years ago would have been guys like me up here saying, watch out, you're going to be suffer from a reduction in fixed operations revenue as you sell more EVs. Well, a couple of things have happened, right? The EV appetite hasn't been there. We haven't sold as many EVs as was forecasted. And with Trump threatening to remove the consumer-facing tax incentives, there may not be a lot of demand for EVs in the short term. And number two is the cars continue to get more sophisticated, right? So this is courtesy of one of the companies we invested in, War Cloud. This will vary from automaker to automaker and market to market. But on average, after the warranty period, franchise dealers suffer from about a 70% defect rate. There's about a 70% chance that the consumer will no longer come to you. They're going to come to an independent repair shop to get the work done. And this is pretty persistent over time. Brands may differ, etc. I believe, and I'm about to tell you why, I could be entirely wrong. I believe that we're going to see a tremendous flattening of this line, meaning consumers are going to be much more loyal to the franchise dealer to get work done than they were in the past for a couple of reasons. So let me share that. And this is despite the fact that we will see national right to repair acts. There will be right to repair acts that allow the average independent repair shop to get access to telematics data and the vehicle data, schematics, etc. Get all the codes, etc. But I believe that despite national right to repair acts, the franchise dealers are going to be busier than ever in fixed ops, which is good because more than half of a dealer's profitability, according to NADA numbers, is delivered through fixed operations. And why is that? I will say, let me go back to this slide. So two things are happening. The cars are getting more complex, meaning the technician skill needed is going to become much more sophisticated. And at the same time, the automakers are going to be supplying proprietary tools that are going to be needed to work on these vehicles. The average independent repair shop isn't going to be able to hire a technician that's sophisticated enough to be able to work on these vehicles. At the same time, they're going to need a tool set. When I grew up, you used to have a flat-headed screwdriver and you could go in and adjust a carburetor. Showing my age maybe. Now you need sophisticated tools that are specific, not only to the OEM, sometimes that make and model, and the technician skill is going to continue to get higher, which means probably the hourly rate that you're able to bill is going to be higher, but it's going to be very, very hard with these new technology products on wheels to go into the average independent repair shop on the corner and get work done, they're probably going to say, sorry, we can't do that work. You need to go back to your franchise dealer. So despite the fact that we're going to see a national movement towards right to repair acts, there's no doubt about that. I actually believe that the loyalty to franchise dealers after the warranty period is going to flatten out, and you're going to be busier than ever with vehicles, even if we have more EVs that have longer service intervals. Okay, so let me get to my last thing here before we get Jay up here, and let me talk about the dealer model. I've been around for 25 years. I've never worked in a dealer, and I will apologize in advance if I offend any dealers. But I liken operating a franchise dealer now, as opposed to 50 years ago. Same profit margins here 50 years later, to squeezing a water-filled balloon. So if you've ever done this with your kids, you push on one side and out pops the balloon over here, etc. You can also liken this to operating an 8-cylinder engine. So whereas 50 years ago, I would hasten to guess that a dealership in America was mostly focused on this department. Which new cars can I get from my manufacturer? How much profit can I make on a new car? And in fact, used cars may have been an annoyance. I don't want to take trades. Leave that to the independent dealers. What we've seen is a tremendous amount of business model innovation. You're a dealer. You're a young guy. You don't know any of this. You walk into when did you start? 5 years. Okay, so a 5-year veteran of the industry walks in and he says, "This is normal. A dealership that looks like it's configured like this." 50 years ago, this wasn't the case. And the beautiful thing, the elegant thing, and the defensible thing about the franchise dealer model is that in any given year, the complexity of the business is that you're running all these interconnected departments. You've got separate P&Ls, profit and loss centers for each of these departments. They're all interconnected, right? New car hopefully feeds your parts and service. F&I is attached to new car. The new cars, if they come back as used cars and as another profit center. But the good thing is, in any given year, we suffer through COVID. You can't get access to new cars. You can take your best people and your capital and focus on used car operations. You can try to focus on getting better people and processes into F&I to increase attach rate and the amount of revenue you're generating per unit sold. You can put your best people on parts and service. And I said earlier, more than 50% of the average dealer in America's profit every month is generated through fixed operations, parts and service. Vitally important that when you sell a car, you're able to retain those customers and keep them coming back in parts and service. And I said, my belief is with the complexity of vehicles, long-term, F&I is going to be very healthy, despite the fact that you hear a lot of people crying out that they're going to be under attack because EVs have longer service intervals. And then selling accessories, and a third of dealers in America have collision shops as well, that if they're managed well can be high profit. And what we didn't get into today is the complexity of these cars means that the actual cost to repair is going to continue to increase, which should manifest in higher insurance costs for consumers overall. So people ask me all the time, do I believe in the dealer model? And do I believe that it's defensible over time? As I look back now 25 years, I think, I saw 3 existential threats to dealers over my career. One was the internet came out and we weren't going to need salespeople. Number 2 was Carvana came out and the world was going to migrate towards online sales and we wouldn't need dealers. And then more recently, the automakers during COVID said, we're going to sell directly. And we're seeing friction here at NADA this week with Scout, part of Volkswagen, threatening to sell directly, and with Afeela, which is the JV between Honda and Sony, threatening to sell directly as well. I don't think that consumers are going to be in America are going to be buying cars directly from automakers in my lifetime. And I think that this franchise dealer model, largely because of this, it's a very complex business that you're running. And for those that operate very, very well, they can squeeze extra margin out. But if history tells us anything, for the last 50 years, it's been a profitable business, a persistently profitable business. Again, for those latecomers here, never has there been a year in the last 50 years where a dealer in America, on average, has lost money. They've been profitable for 50 years, and I think that will persist over time. So 2 observations, and again, I haven't rehearsed this with Jay, so I don't know how this is going to dovetail. Hopefully, it dovetails somewhat, because I have a lot of hope for Tekion transforming the way dealers look at operating their businesses. A couple of things that are just maybe curious to me more than anything, and maybe someone can help me understand after this presentation. Number one is, if we rewind the clock to 1950s, tell me how this can be. We rewind the clock to 1950. Your average salesperson was selling 10 vehicles per month. NADA numbers will tell you last year, 2024, your average salesperson sold 10 vehicles a month. Now, what's happened in 75 years? We had the internet came out. We had all these marketing vendors. We had technology vendors. Why is it that we can't squeeze more productivity out of our salespeople? Now, you might tell me that, humans are lazy. Humans will work hard to get 10 sales, and then they make enough money, and then they stop working. And that could be a comp issue. But I think the promise of Tekion is to help dealers think about human capital, which is a significant expense, and driving more productivity and throughput, no matter how we measure it around any KPIs. Number two, and maybe Jay, you aren't going to be able to help with this one. This is another one it's a bit of a head scratcher for me. So these are NADA numbers. NADA every year publishes the average marketing spend per car sold. If we go back to the very beginning of the internet, 1997, average cost per car sold for dealers in America, $320. Let me fast forward. 2023, $720. Pre-internet, internet. Dealers spending almost nothing on software per month. Dealers spending 30 grand a month on software. How can this be? So David, help me with this. How can we not get more sales out of a salesperson in 75 years? And how have we gone backwards? The promise of technology and the internet was to drive efficiency for dealers, right? If I'm a dealer, I'm thinking like, how am I going to measure success of my marketing department? Well, I better be saying like, my marketing spend better be going down while my revenue and profit should be going up. Otherwise, we're going the wrong way with these metrics. So these are things that keep me up at night. I don't know how, if not for innovative, disruptive companies like Tekion, how we have a hope of reversing these kinds of trends, thinking about our human capital, and driving more efficiencies out of that human capital to allow dealers to make more profit over time and buck that trend, that 2% net to gross overall. So happy to have conversations with anyone at the end as a result. I think my time is up. I see Jay over there giving me the eye. So I appreciate all of your time. For anybody who wants it, my name's Steve Greenfield. My email is there. Happy to send you this presentation. There was more content than I could cover. And if you have answers to these questions, happy to have a dialogue about that. So thank you for your time today.